Distinguished ambassadors, distinguished guests, good morning to you joining us from America. Good afternoon to our guests in Europe. Good evening to our dear participants from the East. It is with great pleasure to welcome you to today's online briefing in our series of regular webinars, where we are discussing important topics related to nuclear arms control. We are the Multilateral Dialogue of the Konrad-Adenauer-Foundation in Vienna and Atomic Reporters, our cooperation partner for this webinar series. Today, we will elaborate on the future of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. After having entered into force more than 50 years ago. A very timely topic since the 10th NPT review conference is scheduled for January 2022, after being postponed due to the pandemic. One can say that the NPT treaty is the most successful and multilateral legally binding instruments, which is governing nuclear non-proliferation, nuclear disarmament, and the cooperation in the peaceful use of nuclear energy. But given worsening relations between competing nuclear armed states, we have to discuss what lies ahead for the NPT after 50 years. Therefore, I'm very glad to warmly welcome our speakers, Ambassador Gustavo Slavinin, Ambassador Annika Markovic, and Ambassador Troy Lulashnik. I will pass the floor to Tariq Rauf, who will be moderating our seminar. Tariq is board member of Atomic Reporters and former head of verification and security policy coordination at the International Atomic Energy Agency. Dear Tariq, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Claudia. I too would like to welcome our speakers as well as all the participants who are joining us for this very interesting discussion on the future of the Non-Proliferation Treaty after 50 years. This session will be recorded, and the video recording will be made available on the websites of the Konrad-Adenauer-Foundation and the Atomic Reporters in a couple of days. The opinions and views expressed in this webinar are those of the speakers and those of the participants. This online discussion will be moderated. Our colleagues will keep track of questions or comments put up in the chat function, and those will be passed on to me to be moderated and to be put up before our speakers. So to discuss the various aspects of the future of the Non-Proliferation Treaty after half a century, we have three experienced practitioners who will be speaking in the following order. Ambassador Gustavo Slavinin is Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary in the Foreign Ministry of Argentina. He is the President-designate of the 10th NPT Review Conference, now scheduled from the 4th to the 28th of January next year in New York. Previously, he was Deputy Foreign Minister in Argentina, among other distinguished positions. Then we will have Ambassador Annika Markovic. She is Ambassador to Austria and Permanent Representative of the Kingdom of Sweden to the IAEA and other international organizations in Vienna. Before this, she was also the Permanent Representative for the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons in The Hague, among other postings. And then we have Ambassador Troy Lulashnik, Ambassador to Austria, Governor for Canada to the IAEA, and Permanent Representative to other international organizations in Vienna. He has served previously as Ambassador in Egypt, Ukraine, and also was the Director General of the Non-Proliferation and Security Threat Reduction Bureau in the Canadian Foreign Ministry. So as Claudia already mentioned, the Non-Proliferation Treaty entered into force in March of 1970. It was extended indefinitely in May of 1995. So this treaty now does not have a termination date. It will continue in force indefinitely. Non-proliferation treaty review conferences have been held every 5 years since 1975. But these days, we focus more on the Review Conference of 1995, which extended the treaty indefinitely, and then the 2000 conference and the 2010 conference, where the states parties to the Non-Proliferation Treaty agreed on a number of measures across the three pillars of the treaty, that is non-proliferation, disarmament, and peaceful uses of nuclear energy. Many non-nuclear weapon states are dissatisfied with the progress in nuclear disarmament. They would like to see more. At the same time, many countries are benefiting from the peaceful uses of nuclear energy, which are under the verification of the International Atomic Energy Agency. And this very week, the IAEA Director General is in Glasgow at COP26, discussing the various ways in which nuclear energy and nuclear applications can help meet the climate goals to be agreed by the states of this world. So what lies ahead for this treaty after 50 years? Will it survive? Will it muddle through? Will it be supplemented by additional measures on disarmament, non-proliferation, and peaceful uses? In the meantime, we've also had in 2017, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which has been approved or supported by 123 countries, but the countries possessing nuclear weapons and their allies are opposed to the TPNW. They favor the Non-Proliferation Treaty as the vehicle for nuclear disarmament. So with these opening comments, may I now invite Ambassador Gustavo Slobonin, President-designate of the upcoming 10th NPT Review Conference, to give us his views. Gustavo?
Thank you. Thank you, Tariq. And let me start by expressing my appreciation to the Konrad-Adenauer-Foundation and to Atomic Reporters for having organized this dialogue, very timely and important dialogue on this issue, and for inviting me to speak today. And I'm very honored to be in this panel. I believe that everybody knows by now that only 10 days ago, the state party to the NPT formally agreed on the date 4th to the 28th of January 2022 to have to conduct the 10th NPT Review Conference. The Review Conference originally was supposed to take place in April-May 2020, but due to the COVID-19 pandemic, it was postponed not once, not twice, but 3 times. But although the conditions that may apply in January 2022 may be far from ideal or perfect for conducting such an important and complex conference, state parties have decided that it's time to meet. It's time that for state parties to fulfill their responsibilities and obligations under the treaty and meet and review the implementation of the treaty and also foresee future actions to further implement the treaty until the next review cycle. As President-designate, I have been obviously just helping in the process. This extended hiatus was very challenging from many perspectives. We have to conduct informal consultations virtually, which obviously pose some constraints and technical problems. But the state parties have shown a tremendous level of flexibility and understanding. And always, I would say that without their enduring support, that would have not been possible to achieve consensus on the dates. There were a number of delegations that they would have preferred to wait a bit longer to see whether the conditions regarding the pandemic will improve so that we could have what they call a full-fledged review conference, meaning that a review conference that would have taken place under the same arrangements as previous review conferences, while other delegations were much more that the timing was of the essence. In particular, taking into account that last year it was the 50th anniversaries of the entry into force of the treaty. Now, because of the uncertainties regarding the evolution of the fight against the pandemic, that would have been impossible to keep postponing the review conference until those perfect conditions will apply. So I'm really grateful, as I said before, to state parties for the flexible understanding positions and having agreed on the dates that I have proposed 2 months ago, and that's why we are going to start working now on the substance. Now, obviously, this is a small victory that we have the dates confirmed, but it's a victory that we're not going to have so much time to enjoy, in the sense that now it's time to start, the hard work. We have to start working on the preparations, on the substance of the issues, and I'm asking all the state parties to start looking into that. Obviously, we have the opportunity in January to address all the issues related to the treaty, and obviously, it's going to be a complex negotiations. But I think this is what the treaty demands from the state parties, to have open, frank discussions and negotiations on all matters related to the treaty. And this is, as President designate and during the conference as President of the conference, that will be my approach. And now, obviously, the arrangements are not going to be, as I say, far from perfect. We are going to be following the arrangements being used now by the first committee so far, and I hope that the conditions will improve, that we can get even better arrangements. We are going to be using the first few days for the plenary, the General Assembly Hall, which will allow for all delegations to participate with up to 4 people per delegations, which is the same format that have been used both at the General Assembly high-level segment this year, as well as the General Conference in Vienna of the IAEA. So I believe that also can apply to our conference, rightly so. When we move into the work of our main committees, we may have to use the currently used cluster of conference room number 1, 2, and 3 at the UN headquarters, as is being used by the first committee. We will have some, issues over there, because not all delegations are going to be sitting where the chair is going to be sitting. They're going to be linked through internal video. But I'm working with the UN Secretariat to try to have a better arrangement for those meetings. And then for the end game of the review conference, when the actual negotiations take place, the last week of the conference, we are going to be going back to the General Assembly Hall, so that we will have better conditions for the negotiations. I met with the President of the General Assembly last week in New York. Excuse me, and he offered full support so that in January we can have access to the General Assembly Hall as much as possible when the hall is not being used by the General Assembly. So I'm hoping that the arrangements in January will be better than what is being used by the UN currently now for the General Assembly main committees. Now, one particular restriction that we may face in January that I'm not happy about that, and many delegations are not happy about that, is not just the participation of the civil society, in the sense that if the current conditions continue to apply in January, there will be no in-person participation from the civil society. This is a decision not by us, not by the NPT state parties or myself. This is a decision by the UN Secretariat based on the epidemiological evaluations together with the City of New York. So for the time being, currently, there is no in-person participation of civil society in any meeting of the UN in the UN headquarters in New York. So we hope that that situation will improve, and that the UN, medical services and those responsible for deciding the restrictions or not on participation by civil society will be lifted, so that we can have civil society participation in person. If that were not to be the case, there will be an interaction, a virtual interaction by civil society with state parties. It's a full meeting allocated in our draft program to that interaction. I know it's not going to be the same thing, but at least we'll have that. And then I'm pushing the UN Secretariat to give us an overflow meeting, conference room close to our meeting, so that civil society, or at least some representative of the civil society, could be sitting in that room and linked virtually with the conference room where delegation will be there. But at least we'll have the opportunity to engage in person with delegations in the corridors or in the cafeteria. So we are working on different scenarios about that. I know that this is not a good news for civil society, but as I say, I'm hoping that the situation will improve and that will be overcome. Now, what we're just now, as I say, we have to start already working on the substance. I'm conducting informal consultations with state parties about just a matter of substance, that there are going to be key issues during the review conference. As I said, I was in New York a week ago. I was in Vienna for the same consultation 4 weeks ago. And next week, I'm going to be in Geneva. So engaging delegations at the three capitals, that most of the delegations of the review conference are going to be a mix of compositions of a colleague from, as I say, Vienna, Geneva, New York, as well as from the main capitals of each state parties. And I'm obviously I'm asking them to start engaging themselves among themselves and in all the pillars. You may have heard before that my mantra as president designate is not to decide, what should be included or not in an eventual outcome document, or what that outcome document should look like. This is the main responsibilities and prerogative of the state parties. Now, obviously, as a president designate, and then when we start the conference as president of the conference, I believe that my responsibility is to encourage state parties to have just a review conference that is going to be addressing all issues of the three pillars in a balanced way, and that any outcome should be also a balanced outcome, but in my view, it should be a meaningful outcome. Many people talk about that, we should aim for, or they're asking me, well, what is the definition of success, or is the conference going to be successful or not successful? I think just, I focus much more on the, the concept of meaningful outcome, because, there are many definitions of success, as probably state parties are, or member of the civil society. But I think that if we're going to have a meaningful outcome, is that meaningful is an outcome that is going to be able to be implemented by all state parties, and that can be followed up and obviously measured. Obviously, it's not going to be easy. Negotiations at the review conference are going to be complex because the issues that we are dealing with are complex. We have issues that they come from the past. They will continue to be in our agenda, as well as there are new issues. Issues that have just appeared recently. Some of them are going to have a negative impact. Others are going to have a positive impact. I'm not going to go through details of all of them. Probably you're fully aware of those things. But also, obviously, the review conference is going to take place in an environment, in a geostrategical environment, which is very complex, it's very challenging. Obviously, relationships, between, nuclear weapon states, among nuclear weapon states, in particular between the U.S. and Russia, and then the U.S. and China, are, a level of intensity and tension not seen in many, many years. But also the discrepancies and confrontations between nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states is also to a level not seen in many, many years. And I believe that that is going to affect the review conference. Always I said that throughout my consultations, I heard just a growing level of frustration by state parties, mainly from the NAM, the non-alignment movement, but also some members of the WEOC, about the lack of progress in the implementation of obligations under Article 6, nuclear disarmament, and therefore those delegations who would like to have, just in the review conference, an assessment of what has been implemented or not from commitments adopted in previous review conferences and so forth. And that obviously is going to be an issue of discrepancies. Nuclear weapon states, or at least some of them, they're having their own views on how to approach those commitments. They believe that the conditions have changed since those commitments have been adopted, and therefore have to be revisited or reviewed, or that some of them are not valid anymore. So I think this is going to be one measure of contention, and that we have to be ready to deal with that. But also is going to be, just necessary to do the forward-looking approach, meaning that, okay, on nuclear disarmament, what as a community, also the parties would like to emphasize in the next cycle. And obviously, just again, the reconfirmation of the past commitment is going to be part of that element too. Whether the reconfirmation of the Reagan-Gorbachev, a motive is also going to be up there. There are many, I think, just good practical proposals on concrete steps that could be implemented by the nuclear weapon states and others in the next few years that could help, push forward the nuclear disarmament agenda, including nuclear risk reductions and other, as I say, concrete measures. I believe that the very valid ones, the Stockholm Initiative is working on that, NPT and others. But I believe that none of them are going to make the trick by themselves. I think they have to be put in a context, in a frame, in a political frame, by which, obviously, the reaffirmation of the obligations to reach a complete, irreversible, and verifiable nuclear disarmament have to be into that concept. I think just something related to this issue is about the reference to the humanitarian consequences of any potential use of nuclear weapons. This is something that we already have in the language of the 2010 documents, but obviously has a much more, validity nowadays, in particular because of what Tarek mentioned, the entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, TPNW. Obviously, for the state parties to the TPNW and to the NPT, it's important for the NPT to recognize, to accept, that the entry into force of that new treaty, and obviously that treaty was drafted and put into force because of that frustration, but also because of the risk of the humanitarian consequences, and therefore pushing for the total abolition of nuclear weapons. On the other side, you have some state parties to the NPT that they are objecting to the new treaty, and in particular don't want to have any reference of that treaty in an eventual outcome to the NPT review conference. So that is going to be another issue. It's a new issue. We have not faced this situation before, because this is a new treaty that was negotiated and concluded during the last review cycle of the NPT. When talking to state parties to the TPNW, they are stressing that they don't want to have this issue to become the main stumbling block at the review conference. So I hope that on both sides there will be flexibility shown, and that we can accommodate the right language to take into account this new fact. Moving into Pillar 2, obviously we are going to be facing all issues regarding to regional proliferation crisis. Here comes to mind, obviously, first and foremost, DPRK. Obviously, there are many delegations that they want to have a strong language against the actions by the DPRK, and both in terms of the detonation of nuclear explosions, testing of nuclear weapons, as well as testing of ballistic missiles. You have several resolutions of the UN Security Council on that, And I believe that that is going to be an issue of political concern, and that is going to be pushed by many delegations. But I believe that there is an overall agreement that they have to be reflected in a negative way, DPRK situations. On the Iran, it's a bit more complex. I believe that several delegations will push for the Iran nuclear weapons and nuclear program is going to be raised at the review conference. But obviously, in the views of Iran and others, this is a matter that is the purview of the IAEA. So obviously, the Board of Governors is dealing with this issue. The IAEA Director General is personally involved in the evaluation and assessment of Iran's nuclear program, and that they believe that that issue should be kept aside, only to be dealt by the IAEA. Then obviously is the matter of the JCPOA, and again it's going to be a matter of whether we reflect that or not. I think just it's going to be an issue again of high, just contention at the review conference. And obviously, last but not least, probably the most challenging element in Pillar 2 is the implementation or the lack of implementation of the 1995 resolutions on the establishment of nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East. This is it's an issue that have been obviously important in the agendas of previous review conferences and will continue to be in ours and future review conferences. I believe that the new element this time around regarding this issue is the UN-convened conference on the establishment of weapons of mass destruction free zone in the Middle East, that it had the first session in November 2019 and is going to have the second session in, I think, a few weeks from now, at the end of November this year. And in the views of many countries, in particular of the Middle East region, this is a welcome process, and that is helping finally to start implementation or towards implementation of the 1995 resolution. And they believe, those countries, that if that were to be reflected in an outcome document, for them that will be enough to tackle this issue. Now, obviously, that UN conference is not attended by all parties or countries in the region. Obviously, Israel is the one that is lacking over there. The US has not participated in that process, and therefore it could be some problems in having consensus at the NPT review conference to have a mention of that UN parallel process. So I'm confident that with the right language, we can have just a consensus on how we tackle this issue. And then the one more technical issue related to non-proliferation is going to be about the additional protocol and the small quantities protocols. I believe that, again, many WEOCs and countries are going to be pressing for the adoption of the additional protocol as the new verification standard. The additional protocol has been signed and ratified by a large number of countries, not all of them, but there's some state parties to the NPT that continue to view the additional protocol as a voluntary measure, as was, when it was adopted back in 1995 at the IAEA Board of Governors. That was the language used by then, and therefore those delegations, I believe that they will oppose any mandatory implementation of the additional protocol. And finally, on the Pillar 3 on peaceful uses, I believe that there is a genuine interest by a large majority of state parties to the NPT to address and to raise the awareness about the peaceful applications of nuclear energies and nuclear science and technologies. It's not that they don't know that. I mean, just this is an issue I've been discussing in the past, but I believe that there is a genuine interest in using the NPT Review Conference, a political platform to reach out to other circles beyond those of experts like yourself, like our colleagues in Vienna, and in capitals dealing with nuclear issues. Obviously, they know very well about the importance and the many, many amazing peaceful applications of nuclear energy. But they believe as Director General Grossi said, that we have to just reach out to the larger room and table, to the larger table, in the sense that we have to get to the table where colleagues dealing with just the development agenda, colleagues dealing with the climate change agenda will start to listen and pay attention to what nuclear applications can do to help also mitigate climate change, obviously to help implement the sustainable development goals, and including, for example, fight just global challenges like the COVID-19 pandemic. So I think just is going to be a couple of initiatives on how to raise awareness and how just to help what the IAEA is doing is already in their technical cooperation program. Is not to substitute or to do something in parallel, but it's only to use, as I said before, to use the NPT Review Conference as a political platform to reach out to quarters, political quarters that normally may not be reached by just the agency and others. So I think I'm going to stop now. There are many other issues I could be discussing about that. But one last point I would like to mention is like, as President designate, I've been really pressing for just a review conference that is more open to the views of different stakeholders. Obviously, the review conference is the prerogative for state parties. They are the ones who meet, discuss, negotiate, and adopt or do not adopt decisions. But I believe that the overall process will be richer and more valid. The validity and legitimacy of the process will be improved if we were to hear the voices of the civil society, think tanks, but also the youth, the new generations have to be heard about these issues, industries and many others, and to do so, just in taking into account, just the right balance, from the gender perspective. I think that will make the review conference, just legitimacy, just broader and deeper, and probably, just having just a better implementation of the obligations under the treaty. So I'm going to stop here. I'm sorry if I exceeded my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Gustavo. I'm waiting for the technician to put me on the video. Thank you very much, Gustavo. That was a masterful, comprehensive overview of the preparations leading up to the review conference in January. And I commend you for your perseverance over the past 2 years in trying to find a date and the meeting rooms at the UN. I was also glad to hear about your concerns about the access for civil society at the review conference. And I hope that by January, some arrangements can be worked out where civil society can have some access, at least, to the delegates and to the proceedings of the main committees. You mentioned in your comments, and you also did so in April, that you would base your presidency in listening to the views of the member states and basically helping them formulate a final document. My view of a NPT review conference president, once the conference starts, is like that of a conductor of an orchestra, to get them to play in harmony to a score reflecting different tunes of different players who brought in different instruments. And so the last time in 2005 and 2007, the chairs or the president completely handed over responsibility to the states parties. The outcome wasn't very good. So what I'm sort of trying to suggest to you is the president needs to keep a hand on the tiller, maybe not a very heavy hand, but still a hand on the tiller. And I was wondering what you might have to say on that.
Thank you, Tariq. Should I respond now or later?
Yes, yeah? You can respond a short one, and then we'll go to Annika and then Troy.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tariq, for your advice. We have discussed this in person in Vienna and virtually. And yes, look, just I participated myself in a couple of review conferences, not just in the in the inside kitchens. But as a delegate from Argentina and with you as one of members of the IAA delegations, so I saw the different variations of leadership by the then presidents of the review conference. I agree with you. I believe that the president have to be, as you correctly pointed out, like the director of an orchestra, which is very, very difficult to have all the instruments just play attuned. But this is what I'm going to do, and me personally, and just allow just to I'm much more hands-on person. So I like to be involved. I like to call the shots, and obviously I will do my best to master that just the symphonic orchestra. But yes, I take your advice, and I think that's my style. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gustavo. And now we have Ambassador Annika Markovic of Sweden. Please, Annika.
I'm here, and let me start by thanking Konrad-Adenauer-Foundation and Atomic Reporters, and of course you, Tariq, for your hard work on organizing this event and for inviting me to speak. And I would also like to say hello to my ambassador colleagues, President-designate Gustavo Slavinen, and my Canadian colleague, Troy Lulasznik. I think we are very fortunate to have Gustavo Slavinen as our president-designate for the review conference. And I'm really delighted to take part in this important panel discussion together with him and my Canadian colleague. So let me start with a few words on the review conference on the NPT, as this is both the starting point and the goal for the Stockholm initiative that you have asked me to focus my intervention on. And we really see the RevCon as a crucial opportunity to strengthen the treaty and by implication, global security. And this opportunity should not and can't be missed. Confidence in the treaty very much lies in existing commitments and obligations being implemented, and us, all states parties, showing the will and flexibility to ensure that this is the case and that we can move forward. So while there may be differing views on what methods we use, we have all committed to the ultimate goal of the treaty to achieve a world free from nuclear weapons. And this obliges us to work together to try to seek a way forward, even if we disagree on modalities or on details. Because after all, some progress is in the short term better than none at all and will certainly benefit humanity as a whole. And some progress can build a bridge to more and even more substantive progress. So it was against this background, coupled with a certain frustration that not more had happened, that the Stockholm Initiative for Nuclear Disarmament was launched in 2019 by 16 non-nuclear weapon states of different geographies and security policies. Despite the range of views among us, we are united in the belief that strong political engagement combined with ambitious and yet realistic proposals for progress will make a difference. So the focus of the initiative is entirely on the disarmament pillar of the NPT. And the aim is to build political support for a pragmatic and results-oriented disarmament agenda that states parties can gather around. And we like to refer it as a common ground agenda. Without flexibility and readiness to accommodate differing views, both from nuclear and non-nuclear weapon states, an agreement on an outcome document might be beyond reach. So the initiative entail 22 concrete disarmament and more in-depth proposals on nuclear risk reduction. It also incorporates an action-oriented method that could help build these bridges between countries and lay the ground for further progress on disarmament. And it can help breaking down different items into more digestible measures, providing for an incremental implementation and thus allowing for progress now in the current strategic security environment. And in parallel, these steps can also serve as confidence-building processes, which can lead to further progress down the line. So I want to be very clear that this is not about setting the bar low. On the contrary, the full range of the proposed stepping stones of the initiative amount to an ambitious package. Ambitious and yet entirely realistic. At the same time, the proposed measures are by no means considered an end goal by the majority of our countries, nor is it an exhaustive list of what we wish to see. Rather, they are the starting points that should lead us all to a more constructive path. And we all need that more constructive path now, as also Ambassador Lauvinen was saying. We strongly believe that it's time to implement commitments made within the NPT framework. The disarmament debate remains highly polarized, and each side continuing to take comfort in a somewhat black and white approach is not helping, and it's crucial that we move away from oversimplistic arguments and instead build an inclusive process that can lead to real progress. And this is what the Stockholm Initiative is all about. Recalling unfulfilled disarmament commitments negotiated at previous NPT review conference, notably in 2000 and 2010, the Stockholm Initiative focused on actions that could be taken successfully in the short term to demonstrate Article 6 progress. And the platform incorporates several additional elements, such as the importance of gender mainstreaming in the NPT context and a call to recommit to the statement that a nuclear war could never be won and must never be fought. Given the important challenges facing the nuclear non-proliferation regime, it's important that the NPT RevCon could not fail, and the Stockholm Initiative offers actually a way forward in this regard. I also want to highlight and emphasize that the initiative does not seek to replace any other initiatives or groupings that already exist. Instead, it seeks to build broad political support for an ambitious agenda with the potential of uniting NPT members at the review conference in January. This said, nuclear weapon states bear a special responsibility, and as such, we hope that they will seriously consider and use the stepping stone method. We would, of course, also very much welcome a more transparent discussion on what can be achieved, and a more in-depth reasoning where there may not be potential at this point in time. This said, all states parties have a role to play and can and should contribute to the discussions on implementation of the agenda. So let me end this by saying that both the Stepping Stones document and the risk reduction package are open for alignments by other states parties of the NPT. And we are most grateful to those of you who already have aligned. Together, we are convinced that we can build a strong foundation for an implementation agenda of nuclear disarmament commitments and finding new ways forward. So thank you very much again for inviting me to this panel, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Markovic, for updating us on the activities of the Stockholm Initiative. Sweden, of course, has a very close relationship with the Non-Proliferation Treaty. As you know, the president of the very first review conference was Swedish, and other Swedes, including Ambassador Rolf Ekéus, played important roles in 1985 and at the 1990 conference. In 1985, we were able to get an outcome in 1990, unfortunately, not because of the CTBT issue. So I was reviewing the release put out by the Stockholm Initiative on the Swedish Foreign Ministry's website after the Madrid meeting. So this was the fourth meeting after Stockholm, Berlin, Amman. And I was very interested in seeing that one of the bullets was entry into force of the TPNW is listed in there. But both Sweden and Switzerland have sort of deferred their decision on the TPNW. And as you know, Ambassador Lars-Erik Lundin wrote this report, which had a recommendation why Sweden perhaps needs to wait a little while. So how would you reconcile the Madrid document of the Stockholm Initiative and the reference to the TPNW, and then at least in this case, the national policy of Sweden regarding the TPNW?
Thank you very much, Tarek, for that important question. And yes, you are absolutely right. Sweden has a long history of working for nuclear disarmament. And I was myself at headquarters in 1995 and engaged very much in the discussions then. And of course, Ambassador Rolf Ekéus is a great colleague and someone that I look up to very much. So it's big shoes to fill. To be working in this area, obviously. And when it comes to the ban treaty, what has been our approach at this time is that we have great confidence in the NPT. We think that the NPT is a fantastic treaty that still has, many years to live. You said it is celebrating now 50 years. Being a little bit older than 50 years myself, I must say that that's a young age. So I think we can still trust a lot in the NPT, and I have great confidence in how the President-designate Ambassador Slauvinen will, as you said, direct all the instruments in January. So I think our hope is now that we can use the Stockholm Initiative and the stepping stones and the review conference coming up now in January to move forward on all three pillars, including on nuclear disarmament. And we think that we have to look at the results from the review conference now and work hard in order to achieve as much as we can and to convince the nuclear weapon states to go in the right direction. So that is where we are at this time. That does not say that in the future we will move closer to the ban treaty. But for now, we think it's good to have the NPT RevCon as a platform to engage also with the nuclear weapon states. We think it's good that the NPT includes them and that there are very clear mandates for the nuclear weapon states in the NPT itself. And we need to do our utmost to see that they are being implemented now.
Good, thank you very much. And there was also Ambassador Henrik Salander. I hope to see him in Ottawa end of this month. And without going into details, our President-designate Ambassador Slauvinen also has a relationship with Ambassador Rolf Ekéus.
That's what I understand. And please say hello to Ambassador Salander. He was my first boss in the ministry, so we also go way back.
All right, thank you. And now Ambassador Troy Lulashnik of Canada. Troy.
Thanks very much. First, let me thank the Foundation and Atomic Reporters and Tarek, to you personally for your ongoing life dedicated work to this field. And I'm also pleased to be here to participate virtually with my distinguished ambassadorial colleagues. And I listened carefully to both interventions, and so I'll try to add to that discussion and touch on areas that sort of round out the discussion and the debate. It's really difficult, I think, to encapsulate 50 years of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. Often, I think debates that we have in the context of the NPT focus on the challenges, the weaknesses, the failures, and there are certainly many, and they continue to be critically important and need to be addressed. But we often, I think, ignore what positive things the NPT has brought for us. And in my view, the NPT has inexorably shaped the laws, rules, and norms that comprise the non-proliferation regime. And so I think that advantage is certainly something that we need to recognize 50 years in. That doesn't mean we celebrate, that doesn't mean we are complacent, but it means that we recognize that it does have advantages and it does bring the global community some positive dividends as a result. And I think Annika spoke about the first pillar. Maybe I'll talk a little bit more about the Vienna Pillars in this context. And I think if we look at the non-proliferation and peaceful uses pillars of the Grand Bargain, you know, they have been central to international security and to global development. If we look at the IAEA safeguard system, it has been the instrument to verify NPT compliance and has made an enormous contribution to the globe. It also has demonstrated very, very clearly the clear demonstration of multilateral cooperation and to reinforce the rules-based international order, which I think is beneficial for all states. And for those of us here in Vienna who see the day-to-day activity and operations of the safeguard system, this resonates very, very clearly. You know, if we look at the numbers, you have 183 or approximately member states who have safeguards agreements, 131 have comprehensive safeguards agreements and an additional protocol. The additional protocol is seen as the standard. So I think that's progress. And if we look at the new and emerging areas of safeguards, we can talk about the agency's work on the state level concept, the work in connection with the JCPOA, how they have managed most recently to maintain a robust regime despite the global pandemic and the restrictions of travel. And for me, this all demonstrates that safeguards play a very significant role in the context of the NPT. Obviously, there are significant problems. Detecting and addressing undeclared nuclear activities remains a challenge. And we do have a serious issue associated with non-compliance. The additional protocol gives us some added tools and access to increase confidence in state compliance with NPT non-proliferation obligations. Iran was mentioned and has unresolved safeguards issues. DPRK has contravened its obligations under its safeguards agreement. And this non-compliance is deeply concerning for NPT states parties. On the peaceful uses pillar, this is one that is often undervalued and not really discussed as extensively as the other ones. But I think what we have to underline is every day we are seeing that increasingly nuclear plays a significant role in addressing many of the global problems with which we are all confronted. I think COP26 and climate change was mentioned. This is one of the most urgent challenges of our time. And we had, we have DG Grossi there with the delegation and has assigned this as a priority for the agency, and member states see that as well and are committed to that. The work on tracking and addressing the impact of micro and nanoplastics, the health of our oceans using nuclear techniques and technology. It's a fantastic contribution that we're making. Cancer diagnostic and therapy work, the agencies working on the ground literally to save people's lives. Doing the same, nuclear has massive applications on food security, on agriculture. And then let's talk about COVID. We've been, the agency and member states around the world have used nuclear techniques, sterilization to support the combating of COVID and surveillance of the disease. These are really significant and even existential questions for all of us. And this is all predicated on the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. So again, looking at the RevCon, looking at what the pillars have done to date and where we're going to go, I think we want to see the NPT as an effective and essential framework for nuclear disarmament, for non-proliferation, and for peaceful uses. We have this foundation of 50 years where we have seen it evolve and those laws, rules, and norms be inculcated. And this is a good and strong basis for us to move forward. I think when we talk about the outcomes of the RevCon, looking at the past NPT commitments, dealing with and addressing and having this frank and open discussion about regional proliferation challenges. And then, of course, we want to see more commitments on the part of nuclear weapon states to disarmament. And I think at the outset, we heard a great context of what we're walking into. If you look at the geostrategic, geopolitical contexts, it's a difficult time. The relationships between nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states, between those who are strongly supportive of the TPNW and those who are not as strongly supportive. And so there are lots and lots of divides, and we have a lot of different countries in the room with different ideas. So while I like this notion of a conductor and an orchestra, I think we have people playing in different orchestras, and we have to find a way to bring them together and agree to the same song sheet. And I think I know a number of groups are very much supportive of this. In Vienna, we're working in the Vienna 10, and we're developing ideas and proposals to make it as robust as possible. I think I like the frank discussion, and I think we need practical outputs, practical measures. On the pillars, we'd like to see more comprehensive safeguards agreements with the additional protocol, the amendment of the small quantity protocol, enhancing the state level approach. We want to see return to compliance. And what I would say is, the RevCon's a really important moment, and I'm gratified that we're all going to come together, and I think that in itself is important. But what we have seen over the last 5 decades is this is a process, this is an evolution, and we need to improve in a balanced way across the pillars so that we work together. And the one thing that I think we all can work towards is we want to see a world that is safe and secure, and the NPT is instrumental in doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Troy. Again, very useful comments. So I'd like to put 2 questions to you at this stage. In one of your earlier positions, you were responsible for and you oversaw a multi-billion-dollar grant under the G7 for improving security of nuclear materials. And we have now a review conference coming up next year of the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material as amended. But it still only covers civilian materials. And large quantities of highly enriched uranium and plutonium in the military fuel cycle are outside any international oversight or whatever. So I was wondering what might be medium-term views on somehow trying to bring some transparency to this. And second, a point I was discussing earlier with Annika, I'm glad Canada is a member of the Stockholm Initiative, and as I pointed out, it includes adherence to the TPNW. Although I think Canada's official position as a member of NATO is a little bit different. So do you see there's a slight shift in the Canadian position here under the Stockholm Initiative? And could Canada join Norway in coming to Vienna for the Ban Treaty Conference as an observer state, for example? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tarek. With respect to the first question, I think in terms of the nuclear security systems that we have in place, the CPPNM, the other instruments, the security series, the practical work that is being done with INSSPs and the IPAS missions, and all the efforts collectively to enhance nuclear and other radiological security around the world is really, really impressive. And I think the instruments and the regime itself is being supplemented in a very big way by countries working together to cooperate in this regard. As you mentioned, CPPNM is confined to limited in scope, and there are those that would like to see that scope expanded. I think, as you know, multilateral negotiations are always difficult, and even in the civilian sector, there are countries that really view security as a national prerogative and a national domain, and I think that view is amplified when we talk about the military materials. I will say that significant work has been done across the spectrum in all types of material in a number of countries, and countries themselves that possess this material and the cooperation with other countries around the world has actually been pretty significant on the ground. So that doesn't address the legal basis upon which countries commit to apply physical protection measures to material and facilities, etc. But in terms of improving the level of physical protection appertaining to nuclear material around the world, it's very, very impressive and has made some significant gains over time. On your second question, I would answer in a way similar to Annika by saying at the NPT RevCon, what we want to do is reinforce the NPT, make it practical, make it credible, reliable, and put it in a good place as a cornerstone for the future. That doesn't preclude other instruments in the regime making contributions as well. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, there are those that are deeply opposed to one and the other and frustrated. And so I think our goal is to try to use the RevCon to bring states parties together and remind everyone why we did it in the first place 50 years ago and what we can get out of it together. And I think if we remember what is common among us, positive action can be taken.
Very good. Thank you very much. Could I now request both Ambassadors Laavinen and Ambassador Markovic to put on their cameras? Thank you. So we have a couple of questions. I put up those that I got from Ambassador Paul Meyer of Canada. Currently, he's on the faculty of the University of British Columbia. A question that I think is for Gustavo is the question of reporting. A number of states are submitting national reports that are already available on the NPT Review Conference website. So Ambassador Meyer's question is, how will these reports be discussed or figure into the deliberations at the review conference, and how might these eventually find some way of being noticed or reported in the final document if and when we have one? And I think the second question is both for Ambassador Lulashnik and Ambassador Markovic. And Ambassador Paul Meyer was asking why no first use or sole purpose did not figure in the Madrid declaration of the Stockholm Initiative. So we'll start first with Ambassador Slavinen and then move on.
Thank you, Tarek, and thanks, Paul, for very pertinent questions. Obviously, reporting is one of the tools that during the 1995 review conference came up, as one practical measure that state parties, in particular nuclear weapons state parties, should use to make the policies more transparent, and obviously that implies two things. One, that the reporting should be kind of contained just a uniform format and provide as much as information as possible. Now, the criticism that I have heard from many delegations about the way that many state parties, in particular, nuclear weapons state parties, present the reporting is that they're difficult to compare because there is no uniform approach or pattern to do that. I think there have been some proposals in the past on how to improve that and maybe just come up with just a pattern that everybody have to use it. But also, just the lack of transparency. And I think just lately, in the last few years, we have seen a decrease in the level of transparency, in particular from the nuclear weapons states party to the NPT, on how much or what they include in the reporting, or sometimes no reporting at all. But also, I think just the other the flip of the coin is that when those reports are available, also they have to be scrutinized. They have to be assessed by all the other state parties, and then just come up with evaluations of that. There's no peer review process in itself of the reportings. It's up to each state party to review or assess them, and then make those comments at the review conference. So I think just the whole process of the reporting, I think is it's a good intention approach. I think it's a tool, it's an instrument that we have not been using, to the full extent. That it's worthwhile, looking into maybe future processes, how we improve the presentation of the reports, but also how we improve the evaluation of the reports. I think just, as I say, there are a couple of initiatives, just like some countries that are looking into that. And I hope that at the review conference we can also discuss that, probably under Pillar 3. I think it will be main committee 3 that can look into that. But I think, again, because there is not a formal process on how to deal with the reporting, it will be up to each state parties to bring up that issue at the review conference. And I hope that the more state parties at the review conference were to just make their own assessment of other state parties' reportings, I think it will be in itself, just an added element to the review process.
Thank you, Gustavo. Ambassador Markovic. Gustavo, you can stay online.
Thank you.
Please, Annika.
Could you please repeat the question?
Yeah, so the question from Ambassador Paul Meyer was that why in the 22 stepping stones, no first use and or sole purpose for nuclear weapons was not included.
So I think what is important here to underline is that the Stockholm Initiative does not exclude any measures to be taken. I mean, what we really want to see is how we can support the implementation of the pillar of the NPT. So wherever we can gather support in a dialogue also with the nuclear weapon states, I think we want to progress. So we're not excluding anything actually at this stage, and we shouldn't, I think.
And another related question was, what is the level of support that is perceived from the nuclear weapon states to the Stockholm Initiative?
Well, I would say, without going too far, that they like a more pragmatic approach. But at the same time, we are very clear that we want to have the ultimate goal of the NPT. We want to get there. So it's not that we can just drag our feet behind. We want to move forward. And we want to do that in a dialogue as well. That's why we have had dialogue meetings to see, how we can progress. And I think it's important that we have the stepping stone approach. We asked them to also take this stepping stone approach and to start to move forward. And as I said before, if you take a few steps now, then you can build on that and you can make progress by creating confidence, by increasing transparency, by showing that there are actions taken. And that's what we want to do now. We want to use the RevCon in January to encourage and to really progress on these steps.
Okay, thank you.
And we are not excluding anything. That's what I also want to stress.
So Ambassador Lulashnik, Canada is not only a member of the Stockholm Initiative, but also the Non-Proliferation and Disarmament Initiative. So could I sort of put the same question from Ambassador Paul Meyer about the no first use and sole purpose part for a Canadian perspective on that, if you will? Were you able to hear my question, Troy?
Sorry, I was kicked off and then I got back on.
So Troy, I was saying that Canada is not only a member of the Stockholm Initiative, but also of the Non-Proliferation and Disarmament Initiative. So I was putting the same question that Ambassador Paul Meyer had posed about no first use and sole purpose for nuclear weapons. And I was wondering whether you might tell us what the Canadian view on that might be, both through NPDI and Stockholm Initiative.
Yeah, thanks so much. I liked Annika's answer that what the group is trying to do is to have a forum of discussion on this issue, and then try to inculcate change that sort of addresses some of the frustration that we've seen and we have shared across the most recent periods. And so, I think Paul's question, there are many steps, measures that can and should be taken. And so I think, and this sort of leads into your second question that we were talking about is, how do the nuclear weapon states react, and what is their sort of dialogue? And and again, I know that New York and Geneva have perspectives on this, but in my experience in dealing with nuclear weapon states, they understand and that this is not only a non-nuclear weapon state issue to see progress. This is a global security issue. It is in their interests. It is in our interests, and we need to work together on it. And I think everyone recognizes the difficult geostrategic, geopolitical environments that were mentioned earlier, but we can find ways to work together and define our interests in common terms. It's not us against them or them against each other. This is in everybody's interest. And I think that's been our approach. And that's why our membership in these initiatives and groups. I think that's what we're trying to drive home, and I've seen success in that. So I actually have cautious optimism related to what we can do in terms of disarmament.
Thank you. So Gustavo, I have two questions for you. One is from our former colleague, former Assistant Director General of the IAEA, Vilmos Germany. This concerns the Peaceful Uses Initiative at the IAEA. And he was wondering, now that this is a formal activity supported by many countries, is there any chance of the PUI being reflected and taken up in the review conference and in an outcome document, should there be one? And another question is from former Ambassador Carlo Trezza of Italy. And this is also to you. And he says, is there any chance to declare catastrophic also the environmental consequences of the use of nuclear weapons?
Thank you, Tarek, and thank you to both former colleagues and friends. I think the PUI is going to be reflected, or at least is going to be addressed by many delegations, in the sense that in having a tremendous impact, the work by the agency on the peaceful applications is, as I say, is well respected and welcomed by all delegations. And I think, as I said before, peaceful uses is going to be, this review conference, I believe that the issue is going to get a revamp in the way that have been seen in the past. It's not that have been, overlooked. That is not going to be, that has not been just discussed at previous review conferences. But I believe that it's like a renewed interest into looking into this matter at the review conference. And I believe that the PUI is going to be a reference of that. The question is what the review conference can do, as I said before, as a political platform to help, obviously the IAEA increase the work and get more financial support, more, more human resources in the implementation of their PUI, as well as, the TAC, the TAC corporations. So I think that's, at the end of the day, it's up to state parties to decide what or would not be reflecting in a potential outcome document. But I believe that this is just an issue that it gets, I would say, consensus from all sides. Regarding the questions posed by Carlos, good to get you that question from you, Carlos. I believe that, as I say, the overall impact of the humanitarian consequences of potential use of nuclear weapons is very high in the agenda of many state parties to the NPT. They're going to bring up this issue, and obviously, the link to the catastrophic impacts on the environment could be another element of that. There's a lot of work done over there. As I say, the question is how we're going to phrase it, how we're going to draft the language. There are some delegations that they're not very prone on including that language, but always I remind them that we have already language from the 2010 document. I think we can work, just as a basis for our language in our outcome document. But I believe that is going to be part of the discussions of the review conference, both humanitarian consequences and consequences on the environment.
Thank you. So we're reaching close to the end of our time, and I'd like to invite some final comments going in reverse order. I've been sort of personally championing the cause of moving the review conference to Vienna. If any of you want to comment on that, be most welcome. But Troy, any parting comments on the review conference, your hopes for this meeting, and how can we strengthen our treaty further? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Tarek. I think for me, we can talk in diplomatic niceties and platitudes, and that's something. But what states want is credible action, concrete results. And this is what we have to work towards. We have to understand that this is a major multilateral negotiation, a major treaty with many, many states parties with their own interests in the room. And we have to recognize that even though we are disparate groups and states, we need to work together, and we need to do so in the common interest. And if we are able to do that, we can together tackle some of the most urgent security and development challenges with which we're confronted. So, I know the level of frustration is high, the environment is difficult, progress is slow and frustrating, but we need to work together, and every step we take together means a better treaty, a better regime, and success down the road. Thanks.
Thank you. And the same for you, Annika, your hopes for the review conference and the future. And we are looking forward again to the traditional role played by Sweden as a neutral country in moving countries to agree on something useful.
Thank you very much for that question. And yes, indeed, Sweden wants to play a constructive role and try to bring countries together and work with the president designate and try to be as helpful as we can at the review conference. We hope that the Stockholm initiative is also going to be a helpful input. It gives a number of concrete steps that is possible, and let's try to work on them. And I think also now with the latest news about how we are going to organize the conference in New York, it's going to work out fine to have it there with enough members in the room from the different delegations and so on. What I'm, of course, very sad about is that we cannot have as much interaction with the civil society as we normally have during these conferences. And I think we need to be creative here and make sure that we take all the opportunities to engage with civil society and bring your views into the discussions and continuously have this dialogue with you during the 4 weeks in New York. So with your input, it's always moving better. So that's my wish, that we can find a way to interact with civil society.
Thank you. Gustavo, President Designate.
Thank you, Tarek. I've been using this title, for too long already. President Designate. It's already 19 months. I was not expecting to be the longest President Designate serving in the history so far of the review conference processes, but hopefully it will come to an end soon. I fully agree with what both Annika and Troy have said in the sense that we have an opportunity as a community of state parties to the NPT to gather in January in New York to discuss all the matters, to discuss frontally these issues, even on matters, complex matters in which not necessarily all state parties agreed on how to deal with them. But I think this is the nature of the process. But as long as all state parties go to the negotiation table with a political will to listen to others and to be flexible and negotiate for the overall good of the regime and of the international community, then I believe that I have hope that we can get a review conference and an outcome, as I say before, that is going to be useful, that is going to be meaningful, and that is going to help what both Troy and Annika say, that how we just maintain the treaty as vital and vigorous as possible. Granted, there are many shortcomings. It's not ideal. It's not a perfect treaty. Like no treaty, no human beings, making is perfect. But this is the best what we have, and we have to continue solidifying the process. And the obligations under the treaty, reiterating them, the necessity for the party to implement them, and then have to follow up on that. I share also the views by Annika that we should have, and that's my approach, a pragmatic ambition to the Rio conference, in the sense that we should aim to, for the best. We should aim for consensus, and that all state parties hopefully will agree on all the issues. We know that it's not going to happen, but at least we should aim high, and then try to get as pragmatic as possible, and also just concrete actions that can be implemented, but also that state parties and civil society and our communities in general can follow up and can see whether there are, a way of measurements. I know that many delegations like benchmarks, other delegations don't like benchmarks, but I think we have to discuss about a process by which other state parties and, as I say, civil society can, measure the implementation of those, just how those obligations on the treaty, and call it past commitments or whatever you want to call it, but those actions are going to be implemented. And at the end of the day, always I said that if back in 1995, during the negotiations of the extension of the treaty, have failed to extend it indefinitely, and always I try to remind colleagues that there were several delegations, including Mexico, and I think just Tarek, you were over there, that they were pushing for only another 25 years extension. I mean, that's why originally the treaty was drafted for 25 years, and in 1995 have to be extended, and there were many who wanted to extend it only for another 25 years, to see whether, in particular, nuclear weapon states were going to fulfill their obligations under Article 6. If not, then they were going to have to renegotiate the whole treaty. At the end of the day, for different political, reasons, the decision was to extend indefinitely. But had the other approach been prevailed, the treaty would have expired last year, and I have really serious doubt whether we would have been able to re-extend the treaty under the current geopolitical, geostrategic situation. I think it would have been extremely difficult to extend the treaty beyond last year. So I think just we have to remind ourselves of that, and then say, okay, be thankful with some criticism, thankful that we have the treaty, but we shouldn't be content with only that, or having the treaty. I think that we have to do our best, and say parties have the responsibility to do the best to see that all the obligations under all three pillars are going to be fully implemented as soon as possible. And that's going to be just my goal as then president of the conference. And I thank you again, Tarek, for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Gustavo, also for reminding us that in 1995, when the treaty was extended indefinitely, it was part of a package of decisions on the strengthened review process, on principles and objectives, the Middle East resolution, and we need to remind ourselves of the promises and commitments that were made. So I'd like to thank Gustavo, Annika, Troy for this very interesting discussion, for leaving us, I think, on a brighter, hopeful note in these slightly depressing times. I will now pass over to Claudia Crawford to also thank the speakers, to also announce our next upcoming webinar, which is on an important issue, which I would like personally to be taken up at the review conference, and that is for the states parties to now say that countries should not be able to exclude nuclear materials for nuclear submarine fuel out of IAEA safeguards, but that's a longer discussion on the 24th, which you will hear a little bit more about from Claudia Crawford of the Konrad-Adenauer Stiftung. So thank you very much, and apologies to those participants whose questions we could not get to.
Thank you, Tarek, and thanks to all the speakers for giving us the background on the NPT and the question what we can expect from the NPT review conference. And Tarek, I agree, it sounded rather positive, even we have, of course, a bunch of obstacles for success. It's so many times in those multilateral conferences. But thank you, Ambassador Lulaschnik, for reminding us that the NPT brought positive developments and we're still today, and shows the importance of international order, of multilateralism. And I also like very much what Ambassador Markovic said, that it is important that the state show they will to achieve things. This is always a question of political will, and we really hope that there is enough power to support the will of the states. And you, Ambassador Slovenian, mentioned, among others, the question of the access of civil society to the NPT review conference. This will be a topic for you, and I believe this is really very important. We know that the activism of civil society has an impact and can help to achieve things. So we wish you, Ambassador, a very successful NPT review conference, you as the president of this conference. So, and a special thanks to you, Tarek, for the brilliant moderation as always. I would like to thank our audience from around the world for your questions and comments. And this time again, we have seen how essential it is to provide a platform for dialogue. We have got reminded on the importance of cooperation and exchange. That's why we will proceed further with these webinars, with these online briefings, and as Tarek already mentioned, on the 24th of November, again in cooperation between Multilateral Dialogue of the Konrad-Adenauer-Foundation and Atomic Reporter, we will have the next one, and Tarek also mentioned the topic. We will discuss the current topic on nuclear submarines proliferation and what it means for the EIAA safeguards to this use of these submarines. I wish you a pleasant and also working week. Thank you all again, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.